The Fed announced yesterday that it was going full steam ahead with plans to print more money, to buy more government debt, to get interest rates and mortgage rates down. Now, the problem is their plan's not working. Rates on fixed mortgages surged for the fifth straight week. The average rate on a 30-year fixed mortgage rose to 4.83%. Now, last month, the rate hit a 40-year low of 4%, 4.17%. So what the heck is the Fed doing with our money? Well, the man who's watching the Fed inside of Congress, he is the head of the subcommittee that oversees the Federal Reserve. Congressman Ron Paul, who is author of the book And the Fed, joins us now. Congressman Paul, we want to talk about the Fed, but I got to ask you first about this spending bill that is going to be read over in the Senate, all 2,000 pages, which should take about 40 hours. What do you think about this?
Well, I think it's rather typical of how inept we are in the way we manage government, and who knows what will come of it, but it's a couple bucks involved, you know, trillions of dollars, thousands of pages, none of us will ever read, but it's not hard for me to find out how I'll vote on that, because it's just outrageous, but it's so symbolic of big government and government out of control, and this spending is out of control, and this is our problem. And we've had an election, but evidently those still in charge haven't gotten the message. I'm just hoping that the new Congress, both in the Senate and the House, have gotten the message, but we'll know pretty soon in January whether that has carried over.
Now, the only time in my lifetime when Congress seemed to get spending under control was in the mid-90s, and that was preceded by a government shutdown. Of course, a lot of people say it led to President Clinton getting reelected. Republicans would be stupid to do it again. But on the other hand, it did lead to some responsible spending, or at least more responsible. Do you think maybe now we need another shutdown?
I don't think it would hurt, because if they're not going to look at the numbers and realize how bad it is, I think a shutdown is going to emphasize this. And they shouldn't worry so much about cutting back. The best example to look at cutting back was after World War II. I mean, there was massive expenditures. Of course, we were spending like crazy for the war, but taxes went down like 33%. The revenues went down 33%, and it did usher in. It was really the declaration the Depression had ended after World War II, not during the World War II. So you can cut spending and cut taxes. Just think if we'd have gotten rid of the income tax 2 or 3 years ago when the crisis hit, the deficit wouldn't even have gone up as much, because people would have had all their money and they would have been spending and paying down their debt. That would have been much better than bailing out all these rich guys up on Wall Street. Absolutely. And it would have cost, probably, if you add it all together, it probably would have cost less than the stimulus bill ended up costing. But let's move on to the Fed now, because Ben Bernanke is very proud of the fact that he's been so successful according to his standards. But by his own standards, he has been printing money in order to get mortgage rates to come down. They've been going in the opposite direction. They've risen about 1 full percentage points in the past 5 weeks. Yeah, you know, this is typical of a misunderstanding of Keynesianism, because they believe if government does an action that they can predict the reaction and what it's going to do in the economy, and that's not true. Sometimes if government can do the same thing twice, one reaction will occur the first time and something the second time. So this doesn't surprise me. This happened in the 70s when they were dumping gold in order to show that gold wasn't going up in price. Actually, the more gold they dumped, the higher the price went. And your point is the more they print money, instead of lowering interest rates, which it has done for decades, lower the interest rates, stimulate the economy, the markets come back, and all this. But eventually, when trust is lost and there's too much confusion, just lowering the interest rates may make people more cautious and think, hey, maybe these bonds aren't the best things in the world. So this is what they're discovering, and I think this could be a crack in the big bubble. And to me, the big bubble is the bond bubble and the dollar bubble.
Boy, I hope
if people start leaving the dollar in a rapid fashion, I think we're in for really big trouble.
Well, we are in for big trouble, but on the other hand, you don't want to keep living in a fantasy world, right?
No, we have to live up to, reality, and actually the reality, as bad as the Fed is, the Fed accommodates the Congress, and the Congress accommodates the people. So as long as the people want the spending and they keep voting the individuals in, but I think that hopefully this is changing, and that's what I'm hoping the Tea Party movement's all about, and say enough is enough, you can't keep doing this. But over all these years, the people say, every spending bill, I want you to do it. Of course, deficits are bad, but the Congress, whether it was for war spending or welfare spending, the Federal Reserve was always there. But once again,
and now you look at what the Federal Reserve is doing. They are accommodating the congressional spending by buying up the bonds to the tune of $600 billion with money that they're churning up. Ben Bernanke doesn't like to use the phrase printing money, but that's essentially what they're doing. And it's having the opposite effect on interest rates, and it will probably have a negative effect on inflation.
Yes, and they already have in motion, you know, the no interest rates to the banks, and the banks have been buying up Treasury bills and bonds too, which has been helpful, but evidently that wasn't even enough, so that's why he came in and said, well, we need even more money in circulation. So I wonder when it's going to come out and say, well, I think every family ought to have $5,000 and put a check in the mail for every single person in the country. By his philosophy, that would be his next step, because he says he can do it. The other thing that he brags about, he says, if this ever turns into prices going up, price inflation, which I think has already started in commodities and other, he says, I can handle that. He says, I can take care of that in 15 minutes.
Yeah,
and
sure.
He said, by raising interest rates.
Well,
so
you know what it is, Congressman? It's a contempt for the market, isn't it? It's believing that he has the power to manipulate the market in any way he wants. Let the 300 million players in the market be damned.
It's a bit of arrogance, philosophic arrogance. By the way, he has that.
We got to run, but I have to ask, what are your plans for this subcommittee that's going to be keeping an eye on the Fed?
Well, I'm going to keep a very close eye on the Fed and use every tool that I have to promote the auditing of the Fed, and also to go over the release of the information that they gave us as a response to, you know, the financial control bill, you know, that was passed. We do get more information, but that's very incomplete. So I want them to complete that, give us all the information they're obligated to give us, and then pursue a true audit of the Federal Reserve. And then I think we should talk about monetary reform, and I think really what I'd like to talk about is the relationship of the Fed to unemployment. You know, some people say we should take away from the Fed their obligation to provide full employment. So they failed there. But I want to talk about that because the Fed really causes the unemployment. You know, as they inflate and you get your bubbles, the correction is the recession and depression. So that causes the unemployment. So I would like to pursue that discussion as well.
And I read your book. You telegraphed it with a title, End the Fed. We got to end the interview right now. Ron Paul, great to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David.